Hello, and welcome to the latest in the Future Personalized Beauty series. Today, we're looking forward to a conversation exploring the trend of personalization with three great panelists and me who will be moderating. My name is Richard Kestenbaum, and I am a partner and co-founder of Triangle Capital. I have been an investment banker doing mergers, acquisitions, and capital raising for consumer-focused companies for 40 years. Before Triangle, I was a partner in a large firm on Wall Street called Drexel Burnham. I've published 3 books on finance and computer science, and I've taught international business at New York University's Graduate Business School. I am currently also a contributor to Forbes.com, where I write about trends in retail and consumer. In a moment, I'm going to ask the panelists to give us their backgrounds briefly, but I want to point out before we begin, and I'll try and remind you through the program, that we want our audience to also participate in this conversation. At the bottom of your screens, you should see a button or tab for Q&A. If you click it, you'll be able to enter questions, and there's a team standing by who will sort the questions out and send them to me to ask our panelists. At the end of the session, we'll try to have some time just for Q&A, and if we can insert some questions from our audience in the interim, we'll try and do that too. Now, panelists, could you please give us a moment to tell us about yourselves? Well, maybe we should start with Ruth, and then Stefan and Valentin. And then we're going to come back to Ruth after that to set the scene for what we mean by personalization with some interesting slides. Ruth, go ahead.
Good. So hello, everybody. My name's Ruth Thompson. I lead the consumer business at Cambridge Consultants. For those of you who don't know us, we're a technology innovation and product development company working with clients around the globe on innovation projects from kind of concept through development into launch. I've worked in the consumer space for close to 20 years. I get really excited about understanding consumer trends, and I really love to understand how we can use technology to engage and delight consumers.
Stefan?
Hi, everyone. My name is Stefan Beale. I'm Innovation Director for the Oscar and Paul Group of Beiersdorf in Hamburg, Germany. My background is now for 20 years developing new products for the fast-moving consumer goods business, primarily focused on cosmetics, deodorants, antiperspirants, face creams, and also a 3 years very interesting exercise in the tobacco business developing next-generation products. I have a strong background in product innovation and product development, as well as product research and identification of new consumer insights, and I'm very happy to be here.
Glad you're here too. Valentin?
Good afternoon, good morning, everybody. My name is Valentin Langen, joining today from the very south of Germany, some 40 miles north of Zurich. After my studies in business administration and law, I researched corporate wargaming and collaboration. And while finalizing my doctorate, I had a glance in various entrepreneurial activities. Some were good, some were not so successful. And then I eventually joined a world market leader in machinery equipment. And today I'm sitting here as founder and managing director of Ionic Skincare, which is a startup, a very special startup, a corporate startup. We have a look into this later on. Occasionally I teach innovation and leadership at universities, and I'm also engaged in various startup networks internationally where I mentor young teams and share my experience. And I am super excited to be here today.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Ruth, could you give us a brief introduction with some slides on personalization that I think will set the tone for our conversation?
Great. Yes, of course, Richard. So we're all here to talk about personalization. I think we define that as kind of the act of tailoring an experience or product for the individual. You know, consumers want to feel kind of special and treated as an individual. Consumers want exactly what they want when they want it, and they want the chance to kind of express their individuality. This isn't new, is it? We've known this trend has been around for really quite a while now. And actually, if we think about it, it's been around kind of for centuries, not only kind of decades. Because when you think kind of pre-industrial revolution, actually most things were kind of customized and personalized to you. If you think about the experience of going to kind of a tailor and having kind of something custom made, scroll forward to kind of post-industrialization, we are into kind of mass market products, but there's an awful lot of experiences that can help you kind of feel luxurious and unique to you, and think of many different ways you can take your coffee. The key point here is that this isn't new, and what we really are trying to focus on today is what's next. So kind of the whole conversation on the panel is kind of how do we take this forward? How do we make this closer to the consumer? I think something I find quite a useful way of thinking about this is kind of breaking up the different types of personalization, because there's quite, it's a big topic, there's lots going on. So you think maybe kind of customization in the factory. You maybe think about the experience of, buying a new car. You go into the car showroom, and you can make some product selection choices, like maybe the color of the body paint or the types of wheel trim. And that customization is going to happen in the factory and deliver something that kind of you selected. Think about that's been around for a while, but how can we bring the kind of that personalization closer to the consumer? Maybe kind of in kind of retail, whether that would be kind of online or kind of in store through different ways of doing product selection to make you feel and actually get something that is right for you. Or maybe something maybe is even kind of mixed in a physical store, so it's actually kind of made there in retail. Imagine if we could bring personalization even closer into people's homes, so you could get something maybe just exactly when you want it. Kind of think about that kind of more dynamic personalization. Maybe it's kind of related to kind of who the person is within the household, or maybe related to what you want at that particular time of day. I think there's lots of ways in which we can kind of cut this pie. This personalization is affecting lots of different industries as well. So my fellow panelists are more from kind of the beauty and personal care space, but this trend is affecting many, many different market sectors across the B2C space. And beyond. So we know from kind of seeing who's been signing up in the audience, we've got people from far and wide and from lots of different industries. So excited about how you can all get something out of the panel here today. So before we kind of dive into questions, we're kind of keen to understand more about you as the audience. So I'll pass back to Richard to kick off the first poll.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Ruth. We're going to ask you, the audience, a question. And what we want to know is, where are you in this personalization journey? I'll give you some time to answer the question, and if this conference feature works the way it's supposed to, we're all going to be able to see the answers in about 30 seconds. I make no promises, but I have a lot of hope. So about 10 seconds left. If you can get your answers in, that would be great. And I see the audience is seeing the poll results. So we're going to stop the poll and hope that's informative to everyone and proceed with our conversation. So let's dive right in. So, okay, let me ask you all panelists the question, why? Why do you think that personalization is what consumers want? People have been buying mass products for a very long time. So why is this the right thing to do? Ruth, you made a presentation about it. Why don't we start with you?
So I think it's important to think about what's right for your business, for your consumers, for your category, for your product. Because I don't think there's any such thing as kind of a one-size-fits-all approach to personalization, pun intended. So if we think about it, there's quite a lot of different kind of competing consumer drivers going on here. On one hand, we hear that consumers really want to be treated as individuals and kind of feel special and catered to as an individual. On the other hand, we know that also consumers want to kind of have a sense of belonging and kind of feeling part of a team and part of a group. We also know consumers want the desire to kind of express an individuality, but then they also want convenience. So there's lots of different things going on, and those are just some examples. So you've got to figure out what's kind of the right blend of these and what makes sense for kind of your business. To kind of make that a bit more real, think about some examples. So, for example, the sports and fitness industry, where we're all very used to thinking about kind of, technology to kind of help people to kind of engage and enhance their performance. So there, think of what's the consumer drivers going on. So the consumer is wanting to kind of measure to be able to increase their performance, probably to achieve a goal. They're probably also likely wanting to share that information out to probably be able to compete and be part of a community. It's kind of, there's lots of different things they're wanting to do with that information. Versus, put it into kind of a more kind of medical healthcare context. It's very unlikely people are going to want to kind of broadcast those individual results, but they probably also want to know, where they are within the general population and probably know that they're okay and normal and make sure that they've got something that's right for them. So I think kind of key to kind of the question of why is really knowing, well, why and what flavor makes sense for your business.
Great, thank you. Valentin, do you want to throw something in on that?
Yeah, so I see basically, personally, as a consumer myself, I see three reasons, and one reason is personal experience. That is the unpleasant experience I have with, for example, gifts that don't really speak to me, or product experiences where I simply don't care much and don't have any good experience. For example, filling up my car at the gas station or buying a capsule. So I know personally how unpleasant and unpersonal product experiences feel like. And so as a professional, this rings a bell, and I believe that personalization of products can have a value. But there's also a different reason, a second reason why I believe that personalization is something that consumers want, and this is closely tied to the discovery of individualism. So think about the recent accomplishments when it comes to the discovery of blood types, DNA, DNS, gender types, neuroscience, and so forth. And in the long view on human mankind, it is just now that we are able to capture personal data on the user and on usage, which can help us to further understand the individual person and then develop products and services accordingly. A third reason why I believe, and this is a psychological reason why I believe that we as professionals in the skincare industry think that personalization is something important. That's the bandwagon effect that explains basically fashion trends, but also marketing trends. The more people that talk about a phenomenon, the more real and the more important it becomes. So I'd say that personalization is not something that we should look into for the pure sake of it. We have to be very wise in how we personalize our product offerings to the consumer. So this would be my take of it.
Stefan, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, so for me, the main point is that huge companies like mine and others in every market in the consumer goods industry had the desire to really go for as many products as possible being sold to as many people as possible, which in the end means you always look in market research, you always look at the average consumer, and you always get numbers like 67% of consumers prefer this, and 23% of consumers prefer that, and then you add another 75% of something. However, no one really wants to be average. On average, no one wants to be average, and this really means that everyone looks for a solution that reflects him or her personally, and that gives you the opportunity to feel special on something, in something, on certain occasions. And in days like these, where you on Instagram can be personal and special every other second, you need something that reflects and adds to your personality in a way that you're non-average and above average and special. And this is why everybody desires personalization. And from a company point of view, also when developing products for the average is not as sexy as developing products for everybody special and yourself special. So that also means some of the personalization products are also about the curiosity and the need for being special of the developers themselves.
Thank you. Very interesting. By the way, audience, there's a tab on your screen called Group Chat, and a few people are putting in their location. And that's kind of interesting because there's people all over the world who are watching this chat. So tell us where you are. I'll start. I can do it verbally. I'm in the Rocky Mountains. I'm normally based in New York, but I came here 6 months ago expecting to be here for 2 weeks because of the pandemic, and remarkably, I'm still here. But okay, so love to see where everybody's from. Please enter it in the group chat if you can, and love to learn about that. Okay, so panelists, you've told us what. Now tell us how. Sounds easy, makes sense, all the good reasons. What are some of the technologies that can be harnessed to bring personalization to reality and fruition? Ruth, you want to take that?
Okay, so I definitely don't think it's the availability of technology that's holding us back. I kind of don't think this is the hard part. I mean, there's a whole plethora of things that's available now, whether we're thinking about hardware components that are getting ever cheaper, whether we're thinking about machine learning that's getting ever smarter to be able to extract insights about the consumer, whether we're thinking about kind of infrastructure that's around the consumer, which we can kind of piggyback on to be able to make use of. So for example, the smartphone is the obvious example, which is getting ever more powerful. So there's lots of ways that we can learn and understand the consumer. So you think about some measures you could do, for example, direct measurements. So maybe measuring kind of, biometrics or kind of optical sensors, for example, understanding the skin. Think about kind of indirect measurements that you could do kind of from context. So, what can you learn from the context that the person is in without actually having to do a direct measurement? For example, where is somebody? What's the time of day? What's the weather like? And how can you extract that and be able to use that to be able to build a picture about the consumer? And then there's also obviously asking the consumer and getting people to input information. There's lots of different sources that you can pull in information, and then you can use kind of machine learning approaches to kind of extract out and infer the useful information from that. And other tools such as like digital twins that can create this kind of ongoing models to help you kind of adapt and learn about the consumer. So I really don't think it's the availability of technology that's holding us back here. I think actually that's almost the easy bit, and the hard bit is understanding what the consumer wants and finding something that they will use.
Yeah, interesting. Stefan, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think for me the point is not so much about how we get the data, because we know there are tons of ways of getting all the information we need. We need to really understand the consumer as an individual. The most relevant topic is making it in a way that consumers enjoy it and that it's not a kind of effort for them to get there, because the easiest way for a consumer to really individualize is just buying a brand that nobody else knows in his surrounding, which is very easy because there are so many small brands available currently. So for the consumer, giving in all the information that we want to have to personalize the product needs to be a joy experience that makes him believe that the benefit will pay back for the time invested. And that's the main thing that I consider as relevant here.
Okay, but tell us about the how. What is yes, there is a lot of technology. What is the methodology for doing it? We all want to do personalization. What's the how? How do you do it? You want to share some thoughts about that?
Well, the easiest way, of course, is questionnaires and via apps, via web pages, where you tell the consumer, this is what you can get, this is the number of benefits you can choose from, and please tell us what exact kind of product benefit you want. The next level would be ask the consumer more questions about his or her personality and know what these personalities want. So not asking you, for example, do you want to have high antiperspirant efficacy, but rather ask questions like, how much do you make sports, or how much do you want to be protected, for example? And then the third level could be offering technology that generates data that is uploaded without consumer interaction via asking, but simply telling us about sweat level, blood flow, or whatever else. And all of these need to be offered in a way that for the consumer it doesn't feel like work, it doesn't feel like effort, but it has to feel like a very easy to do thing.
So you've mentioned data, And I'm watching the group chat, and people are clicking in from all over the world. It's amazing how we've all adapted to this pandemic, and in some ways are taking incredible advantage of it. But notwithstanding the human tragedy, which I don't want to minimize, but one of the things it's telling us, you three are in Europe, and Europe is leading the world in privacy issues. So you mentioned collecting data. How do you balance the data with privacy? Where's that going, and how is that going to work out when you gather all this information and it's just sitting there? Stefan, do you want to talk about that?
Well, my experience is that consumers who are looking for customization and personalization understand that personalization is the benefit they get for the price of offering privacy. And that, in a way, the one thing cannot go without the other. So there will be consumers who will not share anything about themselves and accept that their way to personalization, their best way will probably be buying only small brands, whereas others feel like if they share more data and give more information, they will get better products and better product experience, and they will accept the giving away of private data versus a better product experience.
Yeah, really interesting. And I think there's some demographics, particularly age, that relate to that, and that younger people are much more willing to make that trade. Ruth, do you have any thoughts you want to add to that?
Yeah, because I think, Stefan's bringing up, there's a lot of trust people are putting in to kind of put in kind of the data and kind of share their information. I think as we're thinking about designing, thinking about privacy and security of the data as we try and design these systems, I think an important thing in all areas of consumer product development is thinking about the difference of perception versus reality. Because you could design a super secure, super private system, but if the consumers don't perceive it to be so, then they're not going to engage with it. So how can you take people on the journey, I think, is almost as important as what is actually happening. So I think we need to make sure we consider that. I also think, like you said, there's a lot happening in the world of data privacy and security, in personalization and in other areas. And we definitely don't need to reinvent the wheel here. There's approaches that have been adapted in digital security across many different market areas. And we can leverage that as we try and build personalization systems. We don't need to, reinvent something.
Yeah, I want to hear from Valentin on this as well, but there's some comments in the chat about de-identification of data, and yes, we all. So I just want to address that. We all understand that, but we need to keep the data associated with the individual in order for the personalization to be effective. So the de-identification is great if you're taking a survey, but it's harder when you want to continue to apply it over time to each of the individual consumers. Valentin, do you want to add something?
So the thing is, I strongly believe that in the long run, we have to have some kind of companies that help us solve the privacy, the personalization through privacy balance. Because, we are talking always as if those two aspects were mutually exclusive, and I don't think so. If everybody in our industry, and this is not just beauty companies, also other industries, were sticking to the relevant protection laws and make the use of their data transparent, didn't misuse the data, and gave the customer some choice of privacy setting and thus also some choice of personalization experience, then we wouldn't have any issues. But we are proving constantly, and this holds true for banks, this holds true for consumer electronic companies, also for media companies like Facebook, that we don't handle that responsibility carefully. So I think this can be solved if, for example, we have a service where I, as a consumer, pay that service to protect my digital ego and then provides that digital ego to all the consumer companies, for example, right? It can, from an economic standpoint, it cannot be efficient if, for example, Beiersdorf learns how to protect privacy, if L'Oreal learns how to protect privacy, if we ourselves as Ionic Skincare become champions in privacy protection. That will not work. So this would be my take on that.
Well, if I may, what I think you're saying is control has to shift to the consumer. So they permission the people who get access to their, and I think, blockchain and so many other things that are related to that are moving in that direction, but, it requires a new technology infrastructure to make that work on people's browsers or their personal computers. But that's clearly where we are heading, and we see that in so many ways. Okay, let's talk about what's real, what's happening right now. Who's doing this? What's a good example that you guys know about that you can share with our audience of personalization? Anybody want to give us an example? Yes, Valentin, I see a hand up. Good boy.
Yes, of course. So I'm speaking as a consumer, right? So for me, it's certainly non-linear TV. You remember when back in the days, watching TV was, how do we call it here, dictatorial communism? So you had to sit on the couch at a certain time and watch what was provided to you. And today, when I make breakfast for my young kids, I see the first episode, maybe half, and then on my commute to the office, I watch the rest of the episode on a different device. And I have an abundance of choice, and this is just wonderful. So this would be the one thing. Secondly, Amazon, I just like how they give me options on personalizing shipping, for example. I can have it today if I lived in beautiful New York like you, or I can have it in 2-3 days later, the way of payment, installments, or pay cash now, or also, how do you call it, subscription, for example, right? So this is a beautiful example. Of course, Facebook, as mentioned earlier, also very interesting. As a personalized media business model, right? But Facebook also scares me, and maybe Facebook can also be a good reminder or example of personalization gone too far. We all know, for example, that Facebook provides you with news that are very close or that match your views, for example, and this then eventually leads to how do you call that? To you being caught in your own bubble, to radicalization, and to political and other divide in the society, right? So I think in the discussion of personalization, we have to leave room for the element of surprise and discovery, right?
Right. Great. Very helpful. Anybody else want to tell us about what they've seen? Stefan, Ruth, or should I go on? Yes, Stefan. Love the hand raising.
What I love as an example is a German company called My Müsli, which provides breakfast cereals. And they started off as a business simply telling you whatever kind of cereal composition you like, what fruit or nuts or flakes or seeds you want, we mix for you in our shop. And it's, of course, it has been ridiculously expensive, but you could get any cereal composition that you liked. They developed a machinery that enabled them to really produce any kind of cereals more or less in the end by a electronic steering. And the fancy thing about this company is that they ended up with the very, very favorite products, not only in their own stores, but also in the supermarkets next to the Kellogg's, where for half of the volume you pay 5 times the price, and consumers still believe that even the product from the supermarket is more personalized and individualized than any of the other products. So they found the perfect mix of starting personalized, taking a price that is somehow reflecting the value, and ending up in the mass market by still having that image and that assumption and perception of being a truly personalized brand. I love it, although I don't like cereal.
Stefan, what's the name of that company? There's a comment asking that.
It's My Muesli. I will add to the group chat.
Okay, you don't have to, but I think they heard you. Ruth, and go ahead, Ruth. Do you want to say something?
I think a fun example I like is if people know the Stitch Fix system. I think that's pretty clever what they've done. I mean, that company's been around since about 2011, been really successful, and is now public. It's kind of a personalized kind of shopping system where it's curation using you input personal information, you put some preferences, a human style is involved, plus machine learning, and it ships outfits it thinks you would want, and then you put ones you want and you return the others. I think
there's a number of viewers in the audience from the Midwest. The Midwest is where Stitch Fix is the most popular. Okay. I'm sorry, Ruth, were you done? Did you answer? Did I interrupt you? I'm sorry.
No, I think it's quite a simple system, but it's combining lots of things because it's really convenient because it's coming to your home and it's learning dynamically. So it's not doesn't just make some assumptions about you at the beginning, but it kind of learns ongoing. And I think there's some integration with Pinterest as well, which I think is pretty clever from how it's kind of ongoing learning. So I think there's some good patterns from that we can take into other industries.
Stefan, you mentioned scale, and there's a comment in the group chat about scale as well, right? And conceptually, scale and personalization are at opposite ends of the spectrum. So obviously, scale is critical for profitability. So how do you balance those two conflicting tensions?
Well, to be very honest, currently we are not balancing it, and that's one of the reasons why we're still trying to develop good solutions. The main challenge I see with regards to scale is that a company like ours is built to produce millions of products and serve it globally to the consumers. And whenever we talk about product innovation and developing new solutions, we try to use the existing systems we are having. Just giving you one example, if you produce cosmetics, you have to do a microbiology testing for each batch being produced. And for a 5-ton batch, €100 for microbiology testing is nothing. But if you produce at an N=1 level, €100 for microbiology testing will increase the price immediately by €100 plus overhead. So that's not an option anymore. And the challenge that you have to find is not simply apply your current processes and current tools and try to make them smaller, but really reinvent the whole thing in a way that you don't need all these things anymore. So looking at microbiology testing, for example, go away from classical testing and find someone who develops a dipstick for you that you can use instead of cultivating bacteria and looking for this kind of approach. And we're not there yet, but we understand that it's important to really reinvent the way how we make products in order to have a cost per product ratio that doesn't make personalized product ridiculously expensive.
Ruth, do you have any thoughts about that? And if you can, Stefan mentioned an issue of safety, and there are a few comments and questions coming from our audience about safety and personalization. And I think what they're referring to is, if you get down to such a small scale of one-on-one, how do you deal with safety issues? And Stefan began to address that. If you have any thoughts about that, love to hear that too.
So I think, we work with a lot of different multinationals, and kind of to the patterns of the challenges that Stefan is saying. I mean, that's definitely not unique to Beiersdorf. That's kind of across any multinationals who, they've grown their businesses on the economies of scale and kind of, shipping high volume products to the consumer. So I think key from what Stefan said is it's not just almost what you're selling needs to change, it's almost how you go about doing it. How do you go about kind of that supply chain processes? Because there's quite a lot of change that needs to happen. I think there needs to be kind of a complete reinvention of how you think about the supply chain from the kind of the safety and the quality aspect. But there's also kind of, it's not necessarily thinking about the value in terms of that single, you're shipping that single unit, and that's where the whole value is. Maybe there's value in other aspects, such as kind of the insights you can learn about the consumer. and kind of other alternative revenue streams. So I think sometimes kind of a company that's used to innovating in the physical world is kind of assuming the solution is going to be there, and it doesn't necessarily need to be. Obviously, to stay in the physical world, we need to address that kind of safety points, and I'm sure we will come up with solutions, but we don't necessarily need. I'm assuming that kind of we'll be going into kind of across the physical digital divide to find good solutions.
Valentin, yes, Valentin. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, it sometimes confuses me that when we discuss personalization, we tend to see it very narrowly around the product. We all know that the consumer has a consumer journey, so multiple touch points from discovery to purchase to usage to post-purchase. So there are very, very many instances where a brand or a product has some kind of an interaction with the consumer. If production scale is an issue, why not look into the personalization of the other aspects of the entire consumer journey or product experience?
Okay, I want to ask you more about that. Let's talk about startups, Valentin. There's a lot of ways, and there are some comments coming in about how companies are creating personalization, what startups and smaller companies should be focused on, like safety, which we mentioned, which is critical, but how do you convince your consumer and how do you convince yourself that you're doing it right? Influencers. People in the chat have made a number of comments about influencers. And does that relate to personalization? And what should startups deal with in order to create a real and true impression about personalization? And what are the pivot points for them to think about the decisions they need to make as they develop their business about personalization? How do you think about that? And what was your journey like?
So a lot of questions. So with regards to safety is always a priority and is never debatable. So I think check on this. Influencers, yes, of course, we have to make ourselves aware that we develop something, that we sell something, that we have something that fulfills needs much better. Of course. With regards to the personalization value, and I can only speak for skincare, traditionally or typically skincare companies have some kind of a strategic problem, that is that you cannot use a chemical product for digitalization. It will not work. So what we do at Ionic, we have a high-tech sprayer that can capture user and or usage data. So in the most important and critical point for every manufacturer of cosmetic or beauty products, which is the use of the product on the skin, in the bathroom, we are able to know exactly what happens, and we can use all the data to build services around it or to improve our products. So this is what we can deliver as a company. But this is due to our hardware focus or hardware background. As Richard, maybe not the audience, Ionic Skincare was a spin out of a machinery equipment manufacturer, a world market leader in industrial spraying. So complicated aerosol spraying is where we have our DNA, and we are transferring that know-how now in the bathroom and to the skincare consumer. So I am unsure how established corporations can deliver economically, can deliver personalization value when it comes to the product itself, because they just don't have and cannot connect the data. With regards to founding a startup, we don't have any legacy. We have an idea. We have no organizational burden, if you will, and we can build something from scratch given our vision. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes. Okay. Ruth, do you want to add anything to that?
I think it's interesting the differences between the kind of, the multinational kind of and the startup view here. I mean, we work with both, and the kind of there's different experiences, kind of different ends. I mean, the guy's been bringing out, with the startup you can be kind of obviously more agile. You haven't got to change around this kind of super tanker that's got a lot of legacy of what's done there, but also hasn't got the kind of the brands, which almost gives inherent permission to get closer to the consumer. I think there's a lot of opportunities for partnerships here, and we see this kind of across the space. They're kind of bringing the benefits of both worlds.
Okay, so we've talked about what, we've talked about how, we've talked about why. Now I'd like to ask the audience a question. Why not? There's a poll coming up. Why is this not happening to the extent that we would all like to see it happen? I'm going to give the audience 30 seconds to click into this poll. Tell us what's holding you back, and then we're going to ask the panelists a like question. Ten seconds, please. Okay, let's see the results. There we go. Okay, so panelists, why not? Why isn't this happening, and what's holding us back, and why is this hard? Stefan, you may be in the kind of environment, nothing to say about your company particularly, the kind of environment that's hardest, big company. So that's probably the hardest place to create this kind of very fundamental change. So why is that hard? Tell us about that, and what's holding you all back, if you can.
Well, yes, for a company like ours, it is hard, and I will use the very old and heavily overused analogy of a tanker and a speedboat that everybody heard before several times. However, it is so true. If you are a tanker, you're not only having a big ship with a limited speed and a big size and all of this, but you're also having a crew on board which is specialized on running and driving and navigating a tanker. So the whole system is not set up to do something different from navigating a tanker. And if you take the whole team and put it on the speedboat, the speedboat will simply sink because it's too small to keep everyone on board. And if you still try to drive it, it's very slow because there are so many people trying to do something. So that's the one point. The other point is that we, as a very successful company in this market, we have KPIs to look at innovation projects and innovation ideas, which are pretty much built around globalization and mass delivery of products. And in this KPI world, it's very difficult to build a business case that gives you a kind of, after 2 years, profitable idea for a personalization project. So what you really need to do within a big corporate is find people who are capable of driving a speedboat, to stay in that analogy, and define KPIs that are fair enough to really act as good measures that you run against with a personalization project, but that are not meant to deliver millions of products, but rather very few products at also, and that's the final point, very different price level from what you usually deliver as a company. And
let me ask you a question.
Honestly, sometimes I'm jealous of people like Valentin because he's in a different environment which is simply built to do something like this. We as a company found ways now of creating ecosystems and areas where exactly this can be done, which is a bit ring-fenced against the rest of the system, but it's always hard because you're so small, you're just a drop in a big ocean, and you need to move in a different direction.
Let me ask you a question. Talk to us about culture. How do you change culture to make the kind of speedboat action required happen? I know it's kind of an unfair question, so you can pass if you want, but love to hear your thoughts if you can.
I'm happy to take it. In the end, it's all about resilience. You always have to stand up one more time, then you fall. You always have to be someone that people look at and feel like, oh my God, he's doing what he believes in, and he's trying to get it done. You cannot change culture by command. You can only change culture by example. So if you want to do things different, go for it, do it. Don't ask for permission. That's also an old one, but it's still true. Just do it and ask for forgiveness if you fail. And find a setup of other people who will give you the feeling of this is the right place to be, and we all want to get it done together.
Right. Valentin, do you have a perspective from the opposite end of the scale spectrum? Go ahead.
Well, and also from being a corporate guy myself in my prior life. So it's not only culture, but it's the entire mix of culture, processes, strategy, and structure that need to, if you want to shift a company into a personalized product company, right? This is a major shift, as you said. You have to play all those 4 dimensions, and there is one person and one person only which can fiddle those strings, and this is the CEO, right? And we have discussed in the field of digital transformation that the CEO must be the chief digital disruptor, for example. And when personalization is, the desired goal, then the CEO must become the chief personal officer, for example. The cultural dimension will not suffice, I believe. And and as you mentioned, from an outside perspective, now in my role as a startup guy, I remember vividly how I send out mails to 65 members of a world market leading skincare brand just to ask them to hear me for 2 minutes. And I received no feedback whatsoever, even though this company perceives itself, according to their corporate website, as the innovation leader in the skincare industry. So there is some kind of an organizational barrier, and for the single most important thing when it comes to innovation, that is the exchange of ideas, right?
Right. Very interesting. Right. Ruth, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think kind of bringing that together, because it's interesting, the culture question, because I think where we've seen it and been involved, where it's worked really well, from the points that the audience said, having the senior buy-in is really important. And then to the kind of the culture point, when there's almost been the ability to have almost entrepreneurship, kind of think about whether it's within a startup or an entrepreneurship within a multinational, with the permission to do it differently. Because, if you're going to measure it by all the existing kind of KPIs, as Stefan said, this isn't going to work. You're going to need to measure it by something different. So if you can kind of put it more in a bubble, allow it permission to experiment, permission to potentially fail. You've got to be able to try things and be able to do this is going to be hard to be able to change the way around. I mean, several of the audience said in the kind of the questionnaire then about the challenge of the business model. And I think that's often because they're trying to measure it against the kind of the existing kind of KPIs and trying to see kind of selling kind of the same unit as one. Whereas, where else can the business value come from? And you're only going to be able to experiment with that if you can kind of maybe separate yourself a little bit.
Do you have any advice for somebody who wants to get started in personalization and beauty? What's the best way to get started? How do you test it? How do you pilot it? How do you do all the things that you want to do? And, I'm kind of looking at you, Valentin, because you're the startup guy in this group. Do you want to talk about that and maybe share some of your journey in that respect?
Yes, of course. So the Ionic idea started in 2013. And I learned back in the days that in the Wagner culture, we tended a bit to, when new ideas came up, to see problems why this idea would never be successful. Now, a couple of years later, with so much exposure in the startup world, we have changed our perspective. We are now discussing what would it need to make an idea happen. So this is some kind of an attitude towards ideas. And still, when I meet business partners from large corporations, we are always discussing, risks, but far too little opportunity. So this would be one thing. And given the decade-old history of those beautiful, big, successful corporations, you also have an abundance of wonderful ideas within an organization. And if senior management would only listen closely and accept ideas, and listen to them for 2 minutes and give it a try, because it's not only the exchange of ideas and experience from people from different companies, but also from within the company, that would usually be very helpful. It's just those 2 minutes. So this is my learning. And, sometimes as I grow older, I also tend to feel some kind of fatigue when my youngsters come to me, and I give it not that special attention, and I feel and I have experienced that we are missing out on opportunities as well. So obviously it's a natural thing to not listen too closely. With regards to piloting and testing, developing prototypes is fairly easy. You can do it internally in your department. You can ask service providers in the market for a small change. So record time is 10 days for a prototype test. And usually you would have to kind of surpass internal processes, not include the purchase department, which can be a hassle, but this is doable.
Okay. I'm told we have 10 minutes left, so I'd like to turn to some of the audience questions that are really interesting. Great question. What is the future of personalization in beauty? Very broad question, but you guys are deep in this, and you must be having some specific thoughts. And what I'd like to add to that is, what excites you about the future of personalization in beauty, and where do you think is the biggest opportunity? And if I may also throw something else in there, if you have advice for the audience about personalization in beauty, please toss it in. Ruth, you're smiling, so I'm going to call on you because you must have something really clever to say.
No, I was just saying all these different bits added in. Well, I'd say people need to kind of experiment and try. And I kind of said earlier that there isn't such a thing as kind of a one-size-fits-all for personalization. I don't just mean that kind of it's a way for beauty or for kind of beverages and for other spaces. I think people, even within beauty, need to think about what's right for, because all the brands are different. Even within, a company like theirs still has multiple brands. What's right for individual brands, and getting right down within that. What would I love to see kind of for the, the future of it? It's still I can get, me as a consumer, I can get what I want, and I can be able to kind of customize things to be able to get that kind of individual look, and it's just as kind of as easy as possible.
Sure. But that's what personalization is. Tell us, is there something specific that you think is a big opportunity in personalization of beauty in the future?
So I think things linking across maybe kind of the categories across beauty. So if we're kind of thinking about kind of, what is about kind of expressing and being able to get kind of maybe get ready, and how can you kind of maybe link across that? So it's not just about, for example, putting on foundation. It's actually about kind of creating a look. So maybe kind of these things kind of amalgamate and come together.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying that it isn't about a product. It's about what's the end result of everything you do.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting to kind of regimes within the beauty space. People currently buy like cleanser, tone, moisturize. How can that become part of a kind of a system and kind of an experience and make it easier for me to get the results I want?
Very interesting. Valentin, not to make you choke on your coffee, but do you want to add anything to that?
Yes. We have a internal vision at Ionic that is, we want to collect 8 billion different skin profiles. That is a mix of skin types and usage profiles, if you will. I mean, very broadly speaking, today we differentiate 6 skin types, and we believe, Richard, that you are so unique and so wonderful that you deserve your own skin type. So through digital diagnosis,
you're so right, Val.
Huh?
You're so right.
Okay, so this is what we want to do, and obviously, I mean, we are at the very beginning. It's not that easy to miniaturize room filling machines into a pocket-sized cosmetic sprayer. But once we got that up and running, and if you want to share the data, we'll able to work with the data and provide you, hopefully, mass personalized products sometime down the road, together with tech and business partners. Stefan, you are happily invited to join the discussion.
Stefan, anything to add?
Yeah, so it's very, for me, it's really very hard to imagine the future of personalization. The one thing I'm hoping for is that personalization in a couple of years will not something be that we talk about anymore, because we should not forget, if we make consumer products, it's also all about the consumer needs and the consumer insights. And personalization in the end is not an insight, it's just a tool to better deliver on consumer needs. So I think personalization has really made it if we simply start talking only about what consumer needs do we want to address, and consider personalization just as a tool like a lotion, a cream, a spray, or whatever it is, and take it as just one element to be added to our portfolio of technologies.
Okay, it's a question that came in the chat that I think is really interesting. I have a bias because what I do is mergers and acquisitions. We represent buyers and sellers. And the question is, do you think that mergers and acquisitions is helping or hurting the development of personalization in beauty? And part of that is, are the companies that get acquired being given the freedom to continue to develop the personalization that they've been developing? Is that development being enhanced, or is it being squashed? And you guys are, you know, from big and small and advisory. Love to hear your thoughts on this. Do you want to address it? It's a hard one.
I think the hard one is that a company that's being acquired and has been successful before got successful having a certain culture. And that usually when you acquire a company or a business, you are looking for mixing cultures, bringing cultures together, adopting cultures in order to fit to each other. And I think that maintaining the original culture of the successful business is key to really making this a part of your business. If you just take over another company and make it a mini-me of yours, the likelihood is pretty high that you finally lose all the benefits you were looking for. Right. However, at the same time, if you keep it as a company of its own, the overall, so all the cost benefits you were looking for when talking through the acquisition are probably non-easily generated. So sometimes this kind of takeover will help you to really add something to your personal toolbox as a company. And sometimes it's simply like bringing in a couple of new people, which after a couple of years will be assimilated. So that's I think, the spread of challenges you're taking here.
Right. Okay. Audience, we're going to run out of time before we run out of questions, and there are some really good questions we won't get to. I apologize for that, but let me get to another one. Services. We talked about personalization in terms of products. Do you think that there is a big future for personalization in terms of services, and what are your thoughts about that? Does anybody want to address that?
Yeah, I think it will definitely be there, and I think it will be a combination. So we've talked quite a lot about kind of, innovation in kind of the digital world and in physical, and I think it will be across that boundary of kind of physical, digital, and I think that's a way of thinking about the business model. If you can think about kind of a service innovation together, maybe selling a unit of something, and then which other forms of kind of revenue can you get back from that to allow something to kind of iterate more and to be able to provide people kind of additional ongoing benefits. So it gives the consumer benefits, it gives the brand the kind of that ongoing engagement and relationship with the consumer.
Okay, let me ask you another question. I'm going to read this question, and then I want to see if you understand it the same way I do. How much personalization is needed, true individualized products versus steering them into a limited selection of products, right? And I think what that question is addressing is, what is the definition of personalization? There are sites or apps or companies that will create a product just for you that's your unique formulation. But there are other sites that will help you personalize by picking products that already exist, that are scaled products that are just for you. So, are they both valid? This questionnaire is asking how much personalization is needed, one versus the other. But do you think that these are both valid ways of personalizing? And do they both have a future, or will one overtake the other?
I think they'll both have a future because they're right for different types of businesses. So that kind of that latter part of having, helping people be able to choose and select from a range that's already there, that's more kind of curation. So that's kind of more like, like the Stitch Fix as the example earlier, that's kind of curation. That makes sense for certain types of products versus into kind of other areas where it's actually, it's genuinely kind of n equals 1. How much are you asking someone to give up in return for getting that? And that's only going to make sense in certain types of market sectors, certain brands, certain products. So I think there's a future for both types. And like I kind of said at the start, there isn't going to be a one size fits all.
Anybody else? Okay, this is going to be my question, I think. Brick and mortar. Does personalization do away with brick and mortar? Because if you can personalize it on your smartphone, then why do you need to go to a store? So what's the future? Is personalization a threat to brick and mortar?
I think what's important here is to look at the shopping experience, and that this is something that everybody can answer for him or herself. I myself love to go in the city and stroll places and see what's on display. I may purchase online then, but the physical touch is important to me, and we know from research that also online-only brands tend or start going offline and have their brand stores where people can touch. So I don't think this will go away. What will certainly go away will the inner city warehouses. So you go into a shop, you see a product, you purchase it within the store, or you purchase it at home, and it will be delivered to your house. You will not carry it in your bag from the inner city store to your house. This will go away because inner city space is very expensive, or will turn expensive.
So you're raising the issue of inventory. What you're saying is stores won't carry inventory beyond the samples, which is going to reduce their square foot usage, square meter usage. Sorry, Europeans. Yeah. Anybody else? Okay.
Just a slightly opposite position to this, we should keep in mind that all our businesses will focus on sustainability as well. And if we go fully digital, the sustainability objectives we as companies have will be more difficult to reach by delivering each and every single product to the houses of the consumers versus going the standard brick and mortar approach. So I think, and honestly, I hope that sustainability arguments will play a role here as well, and that we will not go to shipping of all the cosmetics products being sold currently in shops via online and home delivery solutions.
Okay, and with that, that's a great counterpoint and a debate that we won't settle right now because we're out of time. So thank you so much for joining us, and thank you, audience, for being here, and wishing you all good health and good day or good evening, and thanks for joining us. Thank you so much, panelists.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody.